Hi, seventh graders. Today we are going to be talking more about adding signed decimals together, so adding those positive and negative decimals. In your notes, we're first going to just review what we know about adding integers. So when we're adding integers that have the same signs, we're going to sum those. So if same signs, you need the sum. So what that means is if we're adding together, for example, two negatives, like -2 plus -3, or two positives, 2 plus 3. For both of those examples, you're going to end up adding 2 and 3 together, so you're finding the sum, and then you're keeping whatever that common sign is. So we're going to add together the absolute values and keep the sign. So 2 plus 3, we add the absolute values of 2 and 3, which is 2 and 3. We add 2 plus 3 to get 5. We keep that common sign, so since we're adding two positives, our answer is positive. For -2 plus -3, we add together the absolute values. So I add the absolute value of -2 is 2, absolute value of -3 is 3. If I add 2 and 3 together, I get 5, and then we're going to keep that common sign, so this one is now negative. First, we're going to look at some examples with same signs, and then we'll come back and look at these different signs. So in your notes, we're going to actually skip a couple of pages. We'll come back to the fractions. So I'm going to have you find this adding decimals page. So when you're adding decimals, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look at the signs and determine if your answer is going to be positive or negative. And so we'll look at some examples here that help us do that. Right now, we're just going to, after we look at our signs and determine if our answer is positive or negative, then when we actually do the next step to solving the problem, the other thing that's going to be important is we need to make sure that our decimals are lined up. So we want to line up our decimals. And then we're going to follow those rules for adding integers. So we're actually going to look at two examples here that have same signs first, since that's what we just talked about. So example 2 and example 4 both have some problems where we're adding same signs. And so what that means is that this number is negative and this number is negative. So they're both negative. They have the same sign. Okay. Same thing with number 4. I have a negative and a negative. And so those two numbers have the same sign. So when we're adding numbers that have the same sign, sometimes one strategy I like to use, just to think about integers for a second, is if we, it's not working. Let me try that one more time. If I had like -4 plus -2, a lot of you, if you think of going backwards 4 on the number line, and then you're moving backwards 2 more, and so you're going to end up at -6. We can use that to know that our answer should be somewhere around -6. So we've moved backward on the number line. So now that we've kind of established, okay, it's somewhere around -6, now let's look at our actual numbers and think about what we need to do. So imagine we went backwards 4 from 0. We went backwards 4.28. And then I'm going to go back another 2.56 on a number line. All right, we're trying to figure out where we're going to end up here. And so what we're going to do to figure out this spot right here is we need to add those numbers together. So I can add 4 and 28/100ths with 2 and 56/100ths. And when I add those together, we're going to get 6 and 84/100ths. And so the next thing that I want to do is, since I've moved further back, that's going to tell me that this answer is negative. Okay, so remember we said that it should be about -6, and so my answer is -6 84/100. So if we look at number 4, I'm adding a negative and a negative again, and so when we add two negatives together, our answer is going to continue to get more negative. Again, one strategy you can use is just kind of forget about the decimals for a second, just to get an estimate. So -3 plus about 0 would be somewhere around -3. So that's going to be our estimate. All right, and then now I'm going to go ahead and solve this problem. So again, if we imagine a number line starting at 0, I'm going back 3 1/10, and then I'm going to go back another 35/100. So to figure out where I'm going to end up at, I need to be adding those absolute values together. So if I add together 3 1/10 and 35/100, I can go ahead and put a placeholder 0 there. So I get 3 45/100, but remember we said that we're getting more negative. So this is -3 45/100 would be our answer there. Now we're going to come back up to that front page, and we're going to look at what happens when we have different signs for adding integers. When I have different signs, what we really end up doing is finding the difference between the answers, the values, or subtraction. So if the add-ins have different signs, we actually end up subtracting the absolute values. We need to subtract those two absolute values, and then we're going to keep the sign of the number with the higher absolute value. So for example, if I had -8 plus 3, the number with the higher absolute value is -8, which tells me my answer will be negative. And then because they're different signs, what I really end up doing is taking 8 minus 3 to get 5. So that answer would be -5. So going back to our decimal page, we're going to look at some examples where we have different signs. So I'm adding a negative and a positive together. So on number 1, first of all, when we look at number 1, let's try to decide if our answer is going to be positive or negative first. So -5 8/10 plus 2.6. So when I look at this, I notice that my negative number has a higher absolute value, or I have more negatives than I do positives. That tells me my answer will be negative. We can also do a quick little estimation here. So let's just pretend that we don't have our decimals. -5 plus 2, well, that would be about -3. So my answer is going to be somewhere around, oh my goodness, around -3. So now let's actually do it. So think on a number line. This would be, if we started at 0, be like going back 5.8. Okay, so going back that -5.8, and then forward 2.6. Okay, so that's kind of a visual of what's happening on the number line. And so in order to solve this problem, we want the difference between those two absolute values. So we're always going to find the higher absolute value, and that one's going to be what we start with, and we're going to subtract the lower absolute value. So 5.8 minus 2.6 would give us 3.2. Going back, originally we said that our answer would be -3. So it's going to be -3.2, or -3 2/10. On number 3, we have -3.3 plus 7.85. So when I look at this one, I'm going to look at my signs and determine if my answer is positive or negative. So I notice that my positive number has a higher absolute value than the negative number. I have more positives than I do negatives. So that tells me my answer will be positive. And we don't really need that positive sign on our final answer, but I'm just doing that to remind me that it's positive. The next thing we can do is just kind of estimate about where we're going to be. So if I think of the problem -3 plus 7, -3 plus 7, that would give me +4. So somewhere around +4. So now let's actually look at the decimals and solve the problem. Again, this would be like, if we think of where 0 is on the number line, be like going back 3.3, and then from that -3.3, I'm going to go forward 7.85. And so again, I need to figure out the difference between those two numbers to figure out what my answer is. So we're going to start with the higher absolute value. So that 7.85 has the higher absolute value. And we need to find the difference between 7 and 85 hundredths and 3 and 3/10. I can put a placeholder. So I get 4 and 55 hundredths. We said that it would be positive. We also had, our estimate was around 4, and so that is our answer. All right, hopefully that helps you a little bit with adding decimals. We will continue to practice in class as well. Have a wonderful day.